Joining me now is the Liberal MP, Tim Wilson. Tim, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. So what are you expecting to happen today?
Thanks for having me.
It's looking like it's going to be just above 8%. Is that what you're thinking is going to happen as well?
Well, I don't want to speculate on hard numbers. The reality is we know we're going through a tough economic time. The measures that have been taken to reduce the spread of COVID-19 has absolutely had an impact on employment levels. And as Tom Petrosky from ComSec just said, the reality is it could be a lot worse if it weren't for the initiatives the federal government had taken to provide the JobKeeper program, which keeps people connected to their jobs. But as we're coming now into this recovery phase, means people are connected into their jobs and their employers to be able to resume where possible their employment as best as possible per usual to keep unemployment down.
Sorry, Tim. Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, you know, it's not just unemployment, but it's underemployment as well, which, you know, if it was all included, it would be a whole lot worse.
Well, that's true. I mean, I don't think anyone pretend otherwise, but that's why policy designed not just to manage people through the crisis, but the recovery, which is what we're, you know, hopefully heading towards, is so critical. And that's been the basis in which the government has engaged, is not just how do we get people back into jobs, but we remove simple things like time lag from when businesses restart and then need to go into the process of rehiring. They still have their existing staff. Now, I'm not going to try and pretend that there aren't going to be people out there who might have worked full-time, as many people who continue to work full-time throughout this crisis, and took reduction in hours to make it possible for more people to be employed while we build the economy back up. I think this is part of the conversation we're going to have, but it's better to have a job, to be able to support yourself and your family, and to put the country in a position where it can recover as quickly as possible.
Well, just on that, and Deloitte released some figures that were well published this week, and some of those figures suggested that the budget may well be back in balance by the middle of the decade. Are you that optimistic?
Well, I think this is the critical difference between how we've responded to this very difficult crisis and some previous governments have responded to previous crises, where they baked in long-term spending that continued beyond the crisis itself. We've said, what is it we need to do now to deal with the problem we have now? What is it we need to do to support people to be able to get back into work, but not to structurally change the budget? And this was a critical focus of the Treasurer's address to the Parliament the other day and also the National Press Club last week, so that we can, we're not structurally changing spending so that we can return the budget to surplus now, or at least to balance, I should say more correctly. What time frame that is, you know, that will in part depend on how much longer this crisis goes on.
5 years seems pretty quick turnaround though, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I think it comes down to the prudence and responsibility of the government, which is why no one can make clear predictions on the basis that we don't know when the current shutdowns are going to end. We've obviously had some relaxation. We don't know what's going to happen in the Northern Hemisphere. You could see second waves in the Northern Hemisphere, but you know, I'm an eternal optimist. With responsible government here in Canberra, you can put in the situation where you can return the budget to a healthier position.
Okay, well, as an eternal optimist, are you optimistic about our relations with China as well at the moment?
Well, Australia's relationship with China are based on a mutual respect and a mutual interest, which is we trade with them because it advances our interests and their interests, and I don't believe that's changed. Now, we have very different political systems. We've got to deal with challenges on a geopolitical and strategic level on both sides of the equation, but countries that come together, meet together on the basis of mutual respect will always find a way to work together.
Is the Foreign Minister doing enough? I mean, there's a growing chorus of criticism against her not being visible. Labor on our show earlier calling Marise Payne, Marise MIA Payne. I mean, is the Foreign Minister doing enough?
Well, I mean, that's just sort of cheap partisan shots that have no real purpose. I mean, the reality is the Foreign Minister has actually been doing things like getting Australians repatriated from overseas, making sure we have relationships with not just Australia, but many other countries across the world to deal with the significant challenge of COVID-19. I mean, having press conferences are for when you have something to announce. If they want a running commentary versus actually doing the job of the foreign minister, if they want show and not substance, then you follow the Labor line. If you want substance, then you'll focus and follow how Marise Payne is doing the job.
Is more restraint needed, particularly from the Senate backbench?
I don't quite understand your question.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of criticism about the Senate backbench kind of dictating foreign policy at the moment. I mean, is more restraint needed in its attacks on China?
Well, I don't think the backbench is deciding foreign policy. That's up to government. Now, of course, we're in a democracy. People are entitled to have their views. I have my views on lots of subject matters, and they're not always perfectly in accordance with what the government thinks. But people are entitled to have their views and to express them, because there are people who legitimately have a concern about making sure that our relationship with China is based on mutual respect and mutual interest. And that's the base on which I want our relationship for China to be.
But are they respecting
the government
us?
has been very firm. Well, the government has been very firm. Let me just finish my point there, which was about the need for things like an independent investigation into the origins of the virus that started in Wuhan. That's in our interest. That's in the interest of the people of China's interests. It's in the global community's interests. And so making very firm, clear policy positions in the interests of humanity is what the basis of this our national interest and humanity is the basis of this government's approach.
Just finally, Tim, what do you make of the actions of ME Bank and Industry Super Australia at the moment?
Well, we've got them before the House Economics Committee today, precisely to ask some questions. Obviously, ME Bank in taking money out of people's offset accounts and without notification is a very serious issue. We've asked them to come before our committee and have an urgent hearing to explain themselves and to go through some of the detail and how they're addressing it into the future, because we wouldn't tolerate it from the Big Four. I don't know why we'd tolerate it from ME Bank. And Industry Super has been producing data and making projections about the impact of early drawdown on people's super accounts. Now, they've put out data that's come into question, and we want to ask them about it.
So is your concern that they're trying to scare people out of taking their super early?
Well, ultimately, it's up to the basis in which they're putting information in the public square. But it's quite clear that they're sending a message they think that it's not in people's interests. It's up to customers to decide. It's their money. But the question then is, what is the basis of the information they're putting in the public square? Treasury has questioned it. Grattan has questioned it. Since then, they've even looked at changing their own data sets. So what's the integrity and the basis of the information they're putting out in the public square to make sure they're not misleading or deceiving customers?
OK, Tim Wilson, thanks for joining us today. Chat to you again soon. Now,